as far as massaging go. But, yeah.
beyond spatial categories and easy distinction between peace and war into a network, a flexible force that dodges our simple attempts to reduce it. We need to develop new analytic categories that recognize military presence as temporal rather than spatial. Assuming 15. The realignment of military doctrine of the last 20 years is the extension of the extension of the military affairs in the gray areas involving non-traditional operations other than the war. The expansion beyond the classical battlefield is a response to the learning countries categories of contemporary war. The adversary is no longer the identifiable army with diffuses the pervasive unbounding and expanding the city blurs. The boundary of civil and military becomes impossible to say where the exercise of force begins and all conflicts of epistemological subpowers. The baseline of the state of war is no longer punctual, it's no longer global all the time, is no longer localized like all and occupation punctual each has lost its centrality, has been replaced by waiting the momentary boiling over low intensity broth is always on conflict of non-battle and eventual attack press force. You can be confident to be able to respond with rapid and overwhelming counterforce. The only way to act on the current of emergence of battle prior to currents and concerns the conditions of which are not fully formed. You can act on the almost present order to influence the active form of the next way the emergence and in the application of forces levels object power, which being becomes object power has positive force, productive, possibly productive, a particular form of life will take next to conditions, life's nexus of force of life. And the politics of fear modulates a perpetual war of preemption. Our response to fear becomes reflexive and instantaneous. Since the enemy is an unknown, we must always be at war for everything. We need to move away from this violent response to potentiality. Your military presence will perpetuate itself through alternative forms and modalities. I'm assuming so. Preemption operates on the present and the future that makes the future the process epistemological uncertainty because of the present and the emergent nature of threat cannot be specified. We come from without within the threat to proliferate unexpected efforts, the potential for efforts still more effort threats. The threat is known to have the ontological status and different potentiality function to concentrate entire humanity entirely on one side. Religion may acts against our other side that we consider crimes against humanity. The enemy is undetectable until they make a move. The military machinery let's go. The offensive, you have to flush them and test and prod the hopes you provoke response. They will be flushed out and taking active form will become detectable. Attackable, and thus you go to the offensive to make the enemy emerge from the state potential. The actual shapes the most effective way to play that specified threat and actively contribute to producing the fear of helpful action. The threat of the present of the threatening future, but simply after the leap into action level potential of the right, so you can turn the individual cause the actual effects, so you can deal with it. All you have to do is effectuate if your preemption operates. The effective planes always contributes to the reflective protection, specifically being the threat. Rock war's success to the extent that the productivity of preemptive war and terrorists perpetuating move the war would have to continue on the other front, so they can continue to Afghanistan or Iraq and morph and move to the Mexican-U.S. border. Preemption is effective operative logic by the causal since the ground is potential compensation for the absence of the actual cause of producing the actual effect in its place. It does this effective preemption is when the future of the unspecific is effectively held in the present perpetual state of potential emergency. The movement of actualization may be triggered. Preemption stands for conflict unlimited, the potential for peace and amended to the perpetual state of undeclared wars. The permanent state of emergencies long become the long war place in the Cold War preemptive war, and which built in tendency may be never ending. And the temporality of military presence is one that seeks to redirect vitality into solely the management of uncertainty. Military presence doesn't exist over there, but it's a subjectivity that has a reactive orientation towards the future. The best challenge available is reclamation of subjectivity, lost vitality, to express itself beyond a mere taming of the future. The logic of preemption is present in this room. Our efforts in rhetoric and debate are part of a larger integrated network of how intelligence formed. The Weinstein's critique is a reduction of military presence. Assuming in 15. The object of full spectrum power force own time is separate life directive. The left barely life is formatively barely intensely poised. Or what comes next is life prime. This also was far card for life reduced to brute mass effective is embodied and mental for life together recall this life is self-unfolding and affective vitality. Full spectrum power finds a fulcrum to leverage time is leverage time the conditioning interval of shock is the next action against the unexpressed background potential action is the outcome. Overall, it's a change relation between the action that results in the newly modulated exponential field which has emerged in the military experience of force beyond forces to leverage retreat about actions conditions for emergence. The large goal is of improved networking, not to augment human intelligence by better informing, but to transform the machine with the place of the human actor in relation to the networking, distributing not so much information, self-deciding of action potential. What was once a peak of human cognition is now the cutting, ever the cutting edge of self-enacted will power the non-battlefield of peace. And militarism's taming of time is ressentiment. If the world is in a constant state of becoming, then ressentiment can only violently react against that, while denying life of any values causes populations to default to authoritarianism and will evolving complexity. Glasos and 13. One is to hand over authority to centralized sectors, reject democratic constitution, technical challenges, speak with access to people, fear democratic constitution, grave authoritarian because stable identities that are come to resentment against speed, grace, stability, and certainty, which the was incapable of providing becomes a drive for revenge against scapegoats who identify with instability. Resentment expresses itself as resentment against the world that allows pain and rejection of the world, the magic of the world of perfection. Resentment against peace, runs automatically against speed, manifests as existential resentment over the peace of the world. Provide one stability, space and time become weapons against foes, becoming to live in time is subject continues to live in a space which is to see space always invade, reshape, and re-territorialize. We feel the ones punch us, we seek to punch back, seek to punch those who are viewed the agents of evil, attempt to blend particular acts to represent all the violent movements and social forces succeed, and re-intend the tendency to personify oppression and figure of individuals to refine particular acts and others to intend to personify the oppression of the weakest, most vulnerable constitution of the world. Only a world free of suffering, uncertainty, security, no loss, insecurity, but no insecurity, no matter what is done, we always fall short of this goalpost. The politics should resolve to defensive more targets and scapegoats for moralizing punishment. Politics should resolve to institute neoliberal policies, making the condition of insecurity and acceleration give rise to resolve to make it speed ever more prevalent as people feel impotent in the face of acceleration and more willing to give power to what they have increasing authoritarian structures by attacking the weak elements and the policy resolve to make it equal to deal with democratic spaces accelerating. They will find themselves in a world to become which means always have a world of uncertain suffering, joy, love, wonder, any every eligible should gain ethical mistakes seriously challenge resolve and voting affirmative is your adoption of a different attitude towards the future. Rather than seeking to tame it, you should free it. Only a subjectivity predicated upon movement, intensity, and energy can foster ethical relations where the military sees a threat. We dare to see Art McCormick in 13. Through the exhaustion that we can play for the future, not the time is problematized, costs and folded judge. Future time acceleration cannot constitute demand for the next hour. When capitalist consumption, the affect is no lack or opposite is all of that. All is affect. The post-human vocabulary of great fraction of rupture is therefore no less effective for the empty conscious time. Speed is qualitative. So is qualitative. Acceleration is always a variable of intensity. Remembrance, replacement culture denies time by suturing together random flashes of cultural remembrance with outline time to durational consistency to make creative connections between those montage gaps and accelerations. So does not equate speed of too fast replaced with capital intensity. All movements is acceleration, this movement is acceleration. The acceleration is too fast for humans. Taking affect as a defining intensity that constitutes life specifically combined with openness to other affects and positive and ethical relation inhuman but not dehumanized. Rather is rendered inhuman through the constitution of lives and null points entirely specific to the position constellation of relations. The political role of aesthetics could be then callous inhuman effective relations that are still to come. This is not a matter of replacement, much of recombination. Strangeness of recombinations creates their relevance. Reference to inhumanity of affects there. Strangeness is the critical point of ethics. Futurity is open to minority recombines is more ethical in the ethics, and the need for unnatural strange recombines are defined insofar as their time like acceleration suggests with the qualities of time as intensity. Cosmogony for aesthetics, walksums, chaos. Art tends by creating a chaos with the role of the opposite. The mapping the chaos determine coordinates if the movement is constant. Aesthetic tools of those that effectuate the most inhuman affects of volleyball is creating flux, which slows the temporal chain and can remap into acceleration. Tends to slowness of meditate ethical relations over the results of a drive for the hyperhuman object that self-fulfills its own eyes. Desire for itself as a new object. The machinics of breaking with capitalist modes of thought would imply a refusal to dichotomy between material process and semi-oppressive brought to consider the connection between the types of assemblage of relations, body, context, and cosmos. Acceleration thinking is the very definition was imperceptible cosmic and in the future could look towards the future without thinking, advance with thinking human, while nonetheless thinking that what the future is inevitable and inevitable change in the future can be thought without preforming what the future will be. The counter post-human will see the future tactical goals, strategic unification of the issues that increase the expressivity of other lives. There's no moments of the way towards ultimate creative future of joy. The future which the human cannot think is a future to which the human cannot belong. And our openness towards the future is not a passive wait and see, but an active ontology becoming the world is an endless world of moving forces that sometimes self-indefinite shape. But make no mistake, what appears to be an identity on the surface is only composed of movements underneath. Rather than seeking to tame those forces through a central act of militarism, we allow them to be beautiful. Mars and NDT. Physics is close to nature, while they more than human vitality lacking or the universe is central routine, only relation between dynamic quantity and potential value, dynamic quantity, no substance attending this constantly changing flux of forces, philosophy schematizes and harnesses the anchoring plane forces to inform of logical but physical postulates and proceeds to identify determined relations between representation regime is radical forcing its law multiplicity upon such from such a perspective bodies mere matter whilst knowledge is the vehicle through which the body master multiplicity community for different perspectives is required to reject the perspective evolution of the equal promoting conscious metaphysics for the reduced to want to what defines the body's relation between forces active and reactive. A physical relation forces active forces affirms the difference with other forces, whereas the reactive force merely denies all. It's not makes a negation sense as a principle because it's the essence of resolvement is will be counterposed to the corpus of resolvement of the desiring body to the rational body functions to regular absorbent body is intensive boundary provisional rather than promoting the logical concept of self-identical same integral to philosophy of identity is derivative of the process of making same.
Alright.
Yep.
You say that we misunderstand military presence. So what exactly is military presence?
Military presence is a temporality of preemption that attempts to control the conditions through which threats can emerge.
Okay, and you say that that exists in this particular space, right? In this debate space.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like right now?
So,
what is military presence? Who is the military here?
Right, so the military attempts to manufacture particular kinds of subjectivity that would only understand in its spatial terms. That's our argument.
That doesn't answer my question. Who is the military here?
Well, it is a component of some people's subjectivity.
Who's us?
I can't make that judgment myself, but the military attempts to manufacture student scholars who understand the military as a spatial category rather than one of
So if you say preemption is bad, and we indicate that, I don't know, some marginalized bodies might be, I don't know, facing this preemption too as well, why would you, I guess, preempt against us by reading this app against marginalized bodies?
Well, we think this app is a good idea, and
Actually,
white
let's just take
people.
a step back. Why haven't y'all read this app before?
it wasn't finished before.
It wasn't finished before.
Also,
so
like,
then,
are
so
you
then if
asking
y'all are
against the black people?
No, like this, we were
If
going.
y'all are
we were
supposed
gonna
to
read this in the
illuminate-
first half round of the
Alright,
NDT.
okay.
Like,
okay,
it's
if
not
y'all are
really
supposed to
fine.
illuminate what is really military presence, then why do we have discussions about humanitarian intervention and on your wiki about Giroux and things like that? Like, why is it that this unique space is necessary to now unveil the master trope of militarism?
Right. Well, we think debate is a place in which folks tend to formulate their subjectivities through repetition and different understandings.
That's
of
great.
how
Why wait till
time-
now?
Well,
Why wait till you hit Rutgers, who read nihilism as well, but you want to beat them to the point of nihilism?
we
The
cannot
app is
decide
fundamentally
upon this
not
app
nihilistic, though.
It's not?
No.
How so?
Wait, when
We're
your
an
app
openness
cites
to the
Nietzsche,
future.
it's not nihilistic. Okay, that's fine.
Nietzsche's
When you
not a
talk about
nihilist.
ressentiment, it's not nihilistic. Okay, that's fine. But let's talk about this idea of war and the idea of ressentiment being violently enacted towards the world. Why is that a bad thing?
Well,
Why is it bad to resent the world itself?
Well, if the world is in a constant state of becoming, then resentment against that becoming would only be able to.
So from
have
slavery
a
to Jim
meaningless
Crow to
kind
the
of
prison
existence.
industrial complex, the world is in a constant state of becoming. This world has changed since I don't know, the 1850s.
Look, if you want to, like, we think that that's one narrative of looking at it. We will also.
What's
will
another
extend
narrative of
competing
looking at it?
narratives. We think that blackness is more contingent than that, and that this idea that there is a static structural notion of blackness that is always opposed and always socially dead is something that is a flawed understanding.
So what's the other side of blackness?
We
Please
see-
tell me about the other
Sure,
side of
we
blackness.
think that it is a result of a contingent assemblages which can be.
Contingent, okay, so what are these assemblages of black people, like, that
Like,
black
we
people?
think there are still moments of agency, right, that can possibly still be
Give me an
exerted,
example.
right? Like, there has still been progress. Our
An example, please.
I mean, civil rights movement.
So there's been progress that seems to defeat your point of military colonizing time, because progress would seem to be a colonization of
Our
time.
point is
but
that there's
we
not
can get that
one
to debate in the actual debate
overarching
itself.
narrative that can explain how society is structured.
Okay. One, case.
I'm sorry, do you know order?
Oh, yeah, one off case.
Can I vote on one or do I need to separate?
Yeah, yeah.
Separate?
Yeah. I gotta reply all, right? Reply to all. Let me know when you have it.
I got it.
You got it? You wanna entangle that real quick?
It's all on camera.
I know. Alright. Is everyone good? A distraught mother with her daughter ventured too close to the flame. Her erratic driving provoked panic. The police reaction was insane. What justification can there be for gunning down an unarmed foe? What cause for the use of lethal force when she had nowhere left to go? By some miracle, her child was spared, though 15 bullets pierced her Lexus. She's too young to recall this day of her mother's final nexus. Suicide by cop most likely will be the media's diagnosis. She was not some terrorist, just a victim of psychosis. The officer who gunned her down and saw her body at his feet might not like his mirror much, might need medicines to sleep. On October 3rd, 2013, in Washington, D.C., Miriam Carey, 34, a dental hygienist from Stamford, Connecticut, attempted to drive through a White House security checkpoint in her black Infiniti G37 coupe. Struck a U.S. security officer, Secret Service officer, and was chased by a Secret Service official to the United States Capitol, where she was fatally shot by law enforcement officers. A young child, Carey's daughter, was found to be unharmed in the car after it was ultimately stopped. Now, this is the case of blackness. Even though her child was still left there, even though her body was sacrificed, magnetized the bullets, the question then becomes, why should we chase this nebulous political object? Your arguments about spatial categories and distinctions between peace and war, bringing some measure of relief or a change of constitutes cruel optimism. They rely on a trick of time that retreats to a not yet social order. Maybe later, refusing the blackmail of doing politics is a rejection of this trickery. Then their special politics does nothing. This is Warren 15. The politics of hope constitutes cruel optimism, promises of read just equality, freedom from justice, progress to political object lies beyond the object of political, to keep blacks not any pursuit of this detriment because it's transcending black system, Pope, rise, black being, black nihilism is a demystifying practice in each vein, and uncovers subject aim and strategies of black political hope that delights in a fantastic object political hope operates through positive alternative, shielding the alternative from rigorous critique by placing unknown delimiting action illegal, only activity legitimated by political and demonizing futures, critiques of politics of hope, power, margin, cruelty, under the auspices of intersides no brighter, no alternative life into the security of an alternative politics of hope must actively refuse the possibility of solution. Another problem disguises the solution, nothing more than this about the problem itself. The solution relies on the calling one, the trickery of time fortified is the construction of life by no other than uncertain the essence of the privilege, the escape of temporality, retreating not yet social order, temporary trick of time, promise simple possibility to realize the indefinite future. Nothing is doing something between action, silence, the critical engagement, political hope, and legitimate action is not political. To do something means to translate to recognize political activity, refusal to do politics and action, to do nothing. Black nihilism rejects the trick of time. Next, sustaining the coherence of American political framework happens through the rejection of the politics of fear. As per the 1AC reproduces the discourses of progress that result in further accumulation of time and injured black bodies, the murdered bodies. Black nihilism is the only metaphysical framework capable of addressing the antagonism, unraveling the political. This is Warren 15. We approach a political progressive uncertainty that to do better, to go better, it provides a political. We are hoping that answer of ontological question harder of suffering. The second sequence of fraction 3 fifths to be alien, 2 fifths that we can be created equal substance, awaiting this event. The American dream realized to the vast suffering, mutilated, the black body serves the vestibule of democracy to come, becomes about possible political without suffering. Is a logical contemporary renation, but by Jordan Davis, Kennedy, penalty, Oscar, being John Bell, Ketchup, but by the chain bomb, Mike Brown, all constitute a failed rupture of the political day, the political discourses we're witnessing shocking accumulation of injured, mutilated bodies, why suffering is increasing, alarming rates, we told to the struggling to keep up like black suffering to death, premier vehicles of political perfection, logical, political, linear temporality, future perfection, better man, sustains black suffering, political to hope, ultimately reproduce the metaphysical structures of black violence as pulverized, black being the essay, considers black knowledge capable of unraveling the political, black knowledge resistant rhetoric that seems impossible to narrative political, to anti-black violence, advances a political apostasy, only ethical response to black suffering. Next, in the face of metaphysical
political violence of the status quo. We renounce all of the ethicality that can exist. Our discussion of Miriam Carey is an embodiment of our refusal to invest in the spiritual currency to the political and debate itself. The only alternative is the performance itself. This is 115. The political and anti-blackness are inseparable, mutually considered the utopian vision of not yet social order that purges blackness from its core, provides a promise without relief, and only aims to immediacy black suffering to keep struggling. The logical struggle perpetuates black suffering, replacing belief in unstable futures as future that our suffers nothing that can exploitive reproduction of it all means of existence, struggling action and work to content political metaphysics depends on the black political. The grammar offers nothing more than a refuse of transformation, exploited hope the black nihilists would embrace a political apostasy. The fact of abandoning renounce the situation on ethical and immorality, the political itself apostasy itself excommunicates himself from a body contrary to fundamental black nihilists renounces the ideal belief in anti-blackness, participates in rules of one another idol. The anti-blackness contrary to belief self-excommunication position itself consistent when faced with the impossibility of realizing not yet social order. Political apostasy becomes a paradigm of political practice and interprets black a political next body inherently wicked and rejects the critique of spiritual practice next to violence is created by the prison and is the side of the black people internationally in the world of white supremacists. Rodriguez 7. White supremacist regimes have been fundamental to the formation of the United States, from child slavery, frontier genocide, and recurrent modes of neoliberal placement, warfare, exception to the regimes have been entangled in the punishment of the structured relations of force that isolate historical comparatively and mentalize white supremacy been artistic, logical organization, hierarchies, human difference, enforcing coherent violence, destruction, genocide, and possibility of historical vernacular apparatus, domination, white supremacy, permanency, invading conception of white rigorous production, penal discipline, the free social, political, biological neutralization of extermination, non-white subhuman body, white supremacy fulfills the discussion of the modalities materiological of violence and overdetermines the social, political, environment, and culture. All structures that compose a global humanitarian, global Americanality. Next to go to case first is the logic of preemption is latent within the 1EC and is used as a form of white violence deployed against black debaters. They read the same 1EC but yet chose to break new against Rutgers. This is the same logic of preemption that they deploy against us that turns all the impacts of the 1EC. This is Bishop 9, the prevention of policing events, justification for preventive nature of Iraq war, the models of intelligence and thus necessity, simplistic causal rationalization of preventative measure known as anything that takes place in regard as terrorism, anything that occur predicated in advance, exterminated in advance. This is what war has become, preemption, carrying the Cold War logic to complete ends. Everything is a threat that does not emerge in control or spread over integral reality is a total cost of war, coalition of all sides against all potential terrorist market at terrorists. And now is the time to decide the 1EC's alternative will capture all of the impacts of the 1EC because time does not function the same way for black bodies. This is Murillo 16. Eric Garner's murder spans 10 minutes away to 24 seconds. He carries I Can't Breathe 11 times, measures of time, mean intersection of time passing, black references and black death. The authors in one time moving the moves and sees moving to count from 1 11 from beginning to breath. The references requires an the narrative and packing with progression. The time's not too late, it's too late, it's too late for the black body position as a slave, anti-human, stands or falls. It is the relation narrative of regression to slavery is the narrative of oxymoron for black bodies. There's no narrative moment to prior slavery, hypothetical moment after slavery would entail emergence of new ontological to end of blackness to humanist, the new episode of impossible narrative tendency, the beyond the episode in which it stands, the progression from equilibrium, disequilibrium, equilibrium does operate for blackness, where right in the march of the state of the season equilibrium, beginning with the enslavement. Time does not move for blacks in the same way it moves for other others. Opposition, the state of being fundamentally violent, disrupted in relation to time, market, time, and now also is the performance. This side, we indicate that performances have to be embodied for you to consider them relevant. The 1EC politics is inaccessible to black folks because they cannot divorce themselves from their identity, which is an impact turn to the 1EC, and next philosophers sustain privilege and should be rejected. This in the Yaha 6 theories of so-called radical democracy tend to be bound down to neglect the material economic realities of people of color around the globe. What are implications for radical democratic agenda for global order and economic political reality? Implications for devastating the third world of bearing a large part of economic rights and democracy for Eurocentric obsession with Western foundation deployment of rhetoric, problems of race and poverty, patriarchal, heterosexual, United States, the same rhetoric and obstacles to historical material realities for U.S. colonialism, imperialism around the world.
Alright, is everyone good? Sure? Okay. The first piece of Warren evidence talks about Berlant's notion of cruel optimism. It says that we have some sort of fantastic object what is the fantastic object the YC would postulate?
The assemblages of bodies.
Your world of becoming. That's something always in the future, always that we're fiending for, always that we're thinking about, but it's never there. We never have it. What has the world become? Like when you're telling me, oh, progress, what progress?
Okay.
That's the type of cool optimism we're talking about.
Sure. And then it also makes this argument about how it says that political hope says, well, actually, I should start with what does Warren define as political hope?
Warren defines political hope as the chase for halls of Congress, the chase for material solvency based on legislation, and the chase for basically protections of black people based on legal change.
And it's your argument that we should never pursue those types of things?
Yes.
Okay. So if there's an instance in which anti-black violence is occurring, would you ever propose like a political solution to that type of violence?
Well, we would say that white people creating those solutions for black people is the problem, right?
Sure, but I'm
But
asking
it
about
never
what
gets
your alternative
actualized.
does.
It
I'm asking
never
about what
gets
your
actualized.
Also, the alternative doesn't need to create a solution for black people. We're negative.
Okay,
We
fair enough.
need to disprove the app,
Sure.
which I'm
Um,
pretty sure we will.
The second piece of Warren evidence describes anti-blackness as an ontological problem. The part where it's like all men are created equal, but then the Constitution says black vote for 3/5. How do you know that's an ontological problem rather than some other type of problem?
Because I'm black.
Could you explain why that would necessarily mean it's an ontological problem?
Okay, so sure, because I am black, right, I have to live in the world a certain way. For example, right, because I'm black, I met with certain contingent violence because of my blackness. For example, when I walk into a store, I might be followed by the shopkeeper, or when I walk next to a fancy car, they might close, the locks on their doors because
Right.
they think that I might steal it, right? There are certain types of violence, whether on-take, contingent, gratuitous, that black people are met with because of the color of their skin.
The violences you described don't have any sort of unique character that would suggest it's ontological rather than some other.
All right,
I
well,
think, yeah,
actually,
they're black.
you
That
can
is
look
the
at-
No,
unique-
I think the
unique
question,
characteristic.
I think the question he's
I
getting
think
at
that's
is
a
why are
unique
those
characteristic.
why are those violences sort of like the result of a transhistorical ontological structure?
Let's
not
look
the
at your
result of
very
contingent
let's look at
structures?
your very answer and cross-sex. You said there must have been progress. Our Warren evidence indicates that there must have been progress. Then Trayvon, Renisha, Emmett Till, all of these black folk needed to die for progress to exist. Because if progress is true, then why are black folks still dying?
That's
That is the
that's the
question,
narrative of progress.
Right?
That the
And for
one
you to
needs
believe in
sustain.
progress means you must believe in black death, and that is ontological. That is a necessary relation between freedom and unfreedom.
Are you gonna take a second?
Yeah.
Alright, you good?
Spinning wheel. Alright, gotcha.
The 1AC is an affirmation of the beauty of becoming a movement. Military presence must be understood as a network that develops subjects domestically to justify its occupation abroad. This makes temporality the mode of operation for militarism, in which it is the future and the possible but non-existent threat that must be preempted. That creates a subject of ressentiment which craves authoritarianism and hates the inherent change that gives life's meaning. Against a preemptive logic of fear, we dare to see art where the military sees threats. Only that challenges the technologies of subjectivity. That is the only real reduction of military presence that can be accomplished via debate. Their first argument is that we are a continuation of the logic of preemption because we chose to break a new app. One, all of our apps were fairly shitty and we are losing on them all the time. The fact that we chose simply to read a different app because we thought it was better does not mean we are the same kind of logic of preemption that is the military preemption criticized by the Massimian 7 evidence. We are just a argument as to we are just using debate strategy. There's not a contingent, there's not a link between either of those. Next, they make an argument that war is necessarily preemption. There's this one, I don't know how they get access to this because this is literally the same argument that the Massimi is making. This is an argument as to why Zizek's conceptualizations are bad, not to lose, which means that I think this is, if anything, this is a piece of app evidence, and the only way they get access to it is if they win another link on the criticism. Next, to say that only black time matters. This is not inconsistent with the 1AC. We are fundamentally a criticism of linear time that says that things just simply go in one order. We're saying that notion of Western time that starts from one point and then progresses is problematic, but rather the time and the change of the world is fundamentally chaotic and can go in multiple directions, and that there is no one inherent progressive or linear narrative of time, and that history does not unfold according to any larger narrative structure, which means that there is no possible, which means that their notion of time is not inconsistent with the affirmative. Next, they say that our performance has to be embodied. There's no bright line for this because things like discussion can necessarily have an affect. What is a performance? Our argument is that you should simply judge a performance based upon the affect, and there's no reason why our sorts of discussion cannot necessarily produce a certain kind of affect, which means that there's really no distinction why the kind of discussion that we want to have is separate from a notion of performative affect. Next, they say that our philosophers are embedded in a certain kind of privilege. Again, no bright line for this. Their warrant evidence cites things like Lacan and Nietzsche, which means there's no reason why our particular form of theorizing is bad. It's a matter of how those things are applied, which will be done on the criticism. Also, you can view the 1AC as an abstract tool for breaking down things like anti-black racism. The ideas of the 1AC can form part of a radical critique of the status quo that allows for an openness to the future, which will be done on the criticism. Go there now. Top-level framing question for the entire criticism. Not all futurity is the same. Don't let them pin us in terms of the binary between things like liberal inclusive politics and their form of nihilism. Our assemblages means that we can sometimes strategically engage things like the legal structures in order to make concrete material changes that restrain the state in order to solve for things like violence. But we are not saying that is the only kind of political progress that is possible. We are not simply liberals that say you should always try to be the civil rights movement, just that sometimes things like the civil rights movement can be good and you shouldn't exclude those because that's too nihilistic. Our argument is that the assemblage nature of the political praxis of the 1AC allows us to navigate different political strategies, which is ultimately net better than nihilism. That's also a reason why Perm 2 both is best. The 1AC's move to futurity opens up a space for minoritarian recombinations and new assemblages not thinkable in the status quo. By calling for a leakage of alterity into the current world order, we open the world to forces that will destroy it. The new combinations entailed by the 1AC are always non-human but not dehumanizing. By breaking down the category of the human, we always entail new ethical relations and a destruction of an anti-black worldview. Next, and the 1AC and their the alternative always operates within grids of intelligibility, affixing the body to a state of gridlocked identitarian stasis that cannot account for the movement of energy and matter, and guarantees that their politics is always co-opted with me into the body. What is the subject of positioning, ideological concept, scientific structuring, positionality is built for the purpose of signifying subject formation according to dominant structure thought in terms of coding. Coding can be thought of a position on a grid. The grid was conceived in an oppositional framework of codically constructed simplifications gave which is straight a body responding to a sign of the grid. One term for each pair of the body came to be defined by its painting the grid. The types are simple still permutations on an overarching definitional framework with possibilities of cultural emplacements, including subversive ones for encoding the ideological master structure, where has the potential for changing on how does the body perform its way out of a definitional framework that seems to prescript every changing possible signifying move. How can the grid itself change every body subject was so determined by local was box 2 sign of the culture map. Gridlock positionality begins by the subtracting movement that catches the body in cultural freeze frame is 0 point of stasis, all signifying sight and how to add movement by lack that defines the body. Beginning and end points movement is entirely subordinated to the positions. The very notion of movement is lacking displacement but no transformation. The positions model can't attribute a reality to the interval, the space of crossing the gap between positions, matter movement and body sensation multi-mediated miss, and that means there's a movement movement DA to the alternative. They don't go far enough. Only the ass ontology scrambles the grid that allows social technologies of control to operate. Anything else will just continue the war against all life. Puar and 7 positionings are what emerges. The trick is to express the priority that respects the inseparability and contemporaneousness of disjunct emissions or ontogenetic difference. The field of emergence of experience has to be thought of as a space-time continuum as an ontogenetic dimension prior to separating out of space and time. Linear time, like position gridded space, would be emergent qualities of the VIN of the world's self-relating position is but one derivative of the system's constant motion lane with erratic trajectories and unruly trajectories. The ontogenetic dimension of affect renders prior to representation, even as these categories might be the most pertinent mapping of reference back to affective cells, displacing pregnancy and cultural for these frames simply just allows to attune movements, affectivities as they inhabit and control societies. Diagram controls oriented towards mobility, performance, contingent identities are elaborated through production of simulacra assemblages, conceptual tools that allow us to comprehend power beyond disciplinary regulatory models, particles, not parts where combining assemblages work against narratives of U.S. exceptionalism, challenging the festivity of taxonomy, sending for state surveillance, befilling us versus them in the war on terror, so much allowed for becoming beyond being in. There's no link. Their arguments are in context of futurity being used to promise inclusion for black life within legal structures. We are not attempting to make black life whole by promising it full subjectivity or inclusion within the liberal order, but rather we are to attempt to tear down the Oedipal subject of the law that makes violence against certain bodies necessary in order to be able to sustain that inside, which means we are a direction of their criticism when they make arguments like black suffering is necessary to sustain certain forms of life, because we are a breakdown of that latter form of life by only opening up the subject to the unpredictable movement of the future by a celebration of the potentiality of the present is something that can ultimately destroy the white subject. And racism is not merely a set of opposition between white and black, self and other human and inhuman, but a regime of faciality, a productive system of power that organizes bodies according to their distance from the white male heterosexual face at the center. Their analysis fails to capture the complexity of faciality, which leaves the core of racism untouched. Aldon and 7. Phenomenons outcasts treat white and non-white not only as diet, but as naturally posed in its little tension big complex process whereby some racial formations become dominant from material and collective interaction, which great speeds faciality self versus other ism instructions, but an abstract machine of faciality, the range of bodies in relation to power faciality, events new faces to capture deviant bodies, multiplied by decisions far beyond any binary such as white, black being imposed, land so popular by different phenotypes, faciality became a matter of imperialist racialization, faces Christ, your average white man, then the first deviance is the yellow black man. The racism has never operated by exclusion. The designation of someone's other racism operates by degrees of deviance in relation to the white face man to interrogate non-conforming traits, tolerating them and ghetto locals, domestic tours, and beggars would join the white freaks on the dance floor. Framework that allows for gradual multi-dimensional deviance is preferable to dialectical method. There is scarcely any place left for dark others. Everyone is included. Everyone is facialized, though the white or racial formation succeeded in ranging all others around it. And the reference to control global literature tends not only to analyze the positive mechanical whiteness through slavery, the regulation of reproduction, new circulation of human life. Europeans alter the face of the global racial assemblage, and their warrant evidence internally cites linear time as much essential things like anti-black violence. Cross-apply McCormick in 13 and the piece of Guar evidence we read above. The 1AC is a breakdown of linear time and causes it to collapse in on itself. We do not see the future as something that is yet to come or some future perfect utopia that will be that we can actualize. Rather, we see the future as a potentiality in the now that we should be able to celebrate, i.e. there are multiple things that come out of the present, and we should just celebrate those multiple opportunities through things like art and things like the possibility of things like collective memory and the relationships espoused by things like the 1NC's poetry. Only exhausting the possibilities of the present will cause things like Christian linear time that promises redemption to be replaced by an imminent world of play and celebration. And there is no transcendental structure to society, which means you should always prefer a political strategy based upon assemblages that challenge contingent forms of violence. Rosales in 13, there is a willpower understood as the process of violence, historical change, period becoming in. There's the willpower understood as the expression of the subject who not only desires power and domination of others, but who redefine change to something which determines technical cultural willpower is never separable from particular forces, never separable ways determinable relation between forces, always classification of willpower is strictly imminent, principles change that determine out the social and historical force society, any prior to any further termination of what is organized society is expressed grounded principles out creates and produces forms of life, the formative moment of resentment, comes to the figure, will nothing is thinking of quality, will nothing is produced in how is found to be reprehensible, is will time source, actuality, will nothing is diagnosed, the people attempt to understand the world of metaphors, which we've forgotten metaphors are mistaken for truth and perm to the planet on mutually exclusive parts of the alternative, regardless of their ontological claims. You should examine whether the concrete political strategies of the alternative are mutually exclusive with the aft. They are not, the perm is sufficient to solve the impact of decay, and any TAs of the perm are relevant, and the alt doesn't sufficiently problematize the militarization of time. Cross-apply Masumi in 15 and Masumi in 7. Military presence works to structure perception or reaction to affect. That mobilizes subjects to fear and change and otherness. Glezo says that leads to a hatred of life and a craving of authoritarianism. That the rejection, their rejection of futurity until by the alternative is the logic of military presence. That's the Masumi in 15. That turns the K because the fear on the face of the future is always projected onto another that needs to be controlled and managed. That's what allows blackness to be deemed a potential that must be responded to violently, which means only a celebration of futurity can solve the logic of preemption that causes their impacts.
Are you ready for cross X?
Yeah.
How does a black person control whether or not they are feared?
Our argument is that it's a question of the way that certain subjectivities are oriented to blackness as a potential.
So if black bodies don't control whether or not they are feared, how can they change the way how other people react to blackness?
I mean, our argument is that is a general ontology that should be adopted by people.
Okay, so if that doesn't change the way in which people react to blackness, right, then that means that people will always react violently, correct?
You know, I mean, I think that this is no, I don't
So
think
if
it does.
people react
right?
violently always, then what does the 1AC do?
No, our argument is not that people react violently always, but rather things to like critique as in forms of the 1AC.
So we
has the
should just
possibility.
critique the violence that happens, even though it just keeps on happening?
No, we
Kinda
think that
just
that actually
seems
can do
self-defeatist.
something, right? Like in context of debate, we think that there are forms of educational practices that say that people should only talk
So if
about
your
the military.
educational practice doesn't allow people to rethink, or at least prevent the violence from, continuously occurring, then why is the educational practice of the 1AC good?
I mean, how
Like,
people will respond to the claims of the 1AC is something we can't control, just as no one can control how people will respond to the alternative, right?
Okay, that's
we think
fine.
That,
That's
because
fine.
we think
Have
the
not
kind of
proven to me a
subjectivity and
reason why
advocating
the
for that
app
in
is
1AC is the most that we can do,
What are the
given
impacts
that
of
there
the
are 7
affirmative?
people in this
What are
room,
the
8
impacts
people
of
in
the
this room right
affirmative?
now. The impacts?
Yes.
Resentiment.
Okay.
We think that there is a larger celebration of being. which,
Besides Rassam, is there another impact?
celebration of being, we have a political
In
praxis.
a world in which black
assemblages.
bodies, they cannot control how they are feared, right? Isn't this resentment inevitable? Black bodies just inevitably hate themselves because they can't control how white people view them.
I mean, again, our argument is that only by opening up to the future and trying to have strategic moments of engagement with white power structures can those things ever
But
be
if
challenged.
this strategic moment of engagement, if it doesn't stop white people from committing violent acts against black bodies, why is it good?
Our entire argument is that idea that it will always be that is too simplistic.
So we should just always just open ourselves.
No,
up to
again, it's not an
violence.
always or never kind of thing. That's the whole point of an assemblage, is that
That's fine.
sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't
Is
happen.
there an endpoint?
No.
Okay. Alright, what do you mean by the future has a potentiality based on assemblages?
Yeah, sure. We think that there are always that the future is constructed via certain things that can happen in the present.
So the Warren evidence mentions all these black lives lost based
Right.
on that same argument you mentioned, i.e. Renisha McBride, Trayvon Martin. Like, how many more black lives do we need to see dead before we
Right.
know whether or not the political will work for black bodies? 'Cause
Right.
it
Again,
seems
we
like
are
the
not
half seems
we are not a
it's good.
whole-scale endorsement of the political.
But you
we
are
never
an
have
endorsement
been.
of the political, yes
We
or
are
no?
strategic, and sometimes that can happen, right? Sometimes the way
so
the police are able to gun down bodies is because there are
So
like
let me get this
sometimes
clear
things that
then,
happen.
right? So sometimes the political can be good, but black bodies will always be feared and they will always be
I
shot
mean, would you
because
say
of
that
that
we
fear.
shouldn't repeal the
Sometimes
T-95 program that allows like old military vehicles to be sent to
That's alright.
police
That's
departments?
alright. I don't think the act gets rid of that. It doesn't.
just gonna be the critique. Is everybody good?
One second.
We're good? For the past 18 years, I've been struggling with the question of who am I, where am I going, and who am I going to become. For the past year, I found myself wallowing in pity, wallowing in self-defeat, wallowing in shame because I feel like I'm just too shitty and I'm not going anywhere. Why does movement have to be beautiful? Why does becoming have to be beautiful? Why does being shitty at debate have to be ugly? Why can we not just be ourselves and still see ourselves as beautiful? Why can't I cry to myself at night and still just be normal? I guess these are the kind of questions that I'm asking myself when they come up here and tell me that in order to be beautiful, I gotta move. In order to be beautiful, I have to be in a state of becoming. But that is exactly the reason that we are critiquing them. They have inscribed a particular type of military presence. They have normalized a particular type of performance as being good, as being natural, as a particular relation to the future that we must have in order for ourselves to be in a state of becoming. We will win in this particular debate that A, there is a particular relation to black life that white people have, that state of fear will never be erased. And is a kernel of absurdity that is always found within the white mind, but we cannot frame ourselves in terms of that, but also be that they have presented a particular type of possibility, a particular type of hope that we are constantly freaking clung to, that we always use in order to escape the actual material violence we experience on a day-to-day basis. What about Miriam Carey? Why can't we have these particular discussions about the anti-black violence that has not changed, but has simply perfected itself throughout the years in relation to our particular bodies? But let's get to the critique itself. I'm just ranting right now. Wait. Wait, I never opened it up again. I got this. The 1ACs believe in the potentiality of the United States and its global order security not only locks in a white savior complex, but also destroys the potential of black resistance in reclaiming the ontic space of spiritual hope for black folk. That's our first piece of warrant evidence. The 1AC believes in the potential of the United States, but history proves Iran, the United States, as Asian allies shouldn't trust the United States. And Martineau, in Theory of Democracy established by the United States where order security implies indigenous forms, reducing security and disorder, and the United States control the assaults to security as they has been that of the United States, a terrible military dictatorship declared to save the people of those countries from the instability and insecurity that former democratic governments died because the U.S. took judgment of what would self-referentially fulfill its own security needs and caution terms such as human rights assistance. So as with the former reinterpretation Declaration of Independence comes into contemporary intervention, reinterprets the humanitarian as that which will be of benefit. The U.S. is a self-referential mode of imposition, a messianic against democracy and paranoid in this project and this white supremacy that allows to claim to defend sovereignty because it violates it, to claim to establish freedom because it dominates it, to claim to build democracy because it obviates democracy through a violation of sovereignty. White supremacy is a social structure to which people adhere and identify the triadic structure of their rights throughout the history of the United States in similar forms, though varying content like racism, the demand for colonial allegiance through torture, the alienness and suffering inflicted on African bond labors, the messianic vision of democracy in which alternate forms constitute threats, all express moments of paranoia which constantly sees others as aggressors, calls the United States as a ghost, the ghost of ultra landed labor, right? Manifests itself as the inherency of an interventionist ethic in the heart of the American conception of democracy. And their teaching methods fail because they don't account for the historical instance of anti-blackness that informs militarism. Domestic policies of the war-making machine did not start with any of the conflicts they isolate. Rather, black slavery created the mechanisms of security that are then exported globally. Their belief that they can disrupt that kind of linear mode of time is exactly the problem. We need to examine the anti-black strips in the middle economies that criminalize blackness and status quo. We ever hold to deconstruct that exportization of anti-black violence. Anti-blackness structures the thought of the terms of emptiness, except as the 1C is a prior question to the affirmative. It's Warren in 15. Anti-blackness is metaphysics. It's a system of thought or organization of existence that structures the relations between object, subject, human, and animal, rational, irrational, free, and slave. That the categories of council ontology, social rationalization, philosophy, individuality, economic expansion, and technocratic domination depend on anti-blackness. The little destruction of black bodies to provide the psychic, economic, and philosophical resources for mentality to objectify, forget, and obliterate being. Black activity in the modern world is perfection of metaphysics, shameful triumph through violent exchange value and rendered malleable within the social political order, being lost in integrity of the transatlantic slave trade. It became possible for an aggressive metaphysics to exercise power, the ability to turn a human
into a thing. Metaphysicians constructed the rational subject against the non-reasoning black who was situated outside of history, moral law, and consciousness, metaphysics, and gender forms of violence as a necessity, as a byproduct thinking is structured by anti-blackness. Any post-metaphysical project that does not take this into account will reproduce the very structures of thought that it will dismantle. And this is even worse in the project of the 1AC. The 1AC attempts to alleviate the metaphysical suffering of the black body by relegating it to the future. But is that kind of unmoored present tense justification that the future is in the now that never allows us to understand the ways in which anti-blackness is something intrinsic to civil society itself, only by ending the world, by affirming black pathology, by affirming a movement, by not affirming action, can we actually come to a place of black spirituality as Warren in the team. The black nihilists will part ways with emancipation, the weakening metaphysical being provides possibility for radical democracy, and a reconfiguration of ethics along the political. We ironically find ourselves back in the pre-Romans of progress, hope, betterment, all the metaphysical instruments that contain, that constrain life. It is not different than the political theology and democratic liberalism. It is discourse of hope, a positive hope, and advances the belief that we can weaken metaphysics and reduce suffering, violence, and pain. When it comes to black suffering, however, we are compelled to hold without the mirror of historicity and acquired by the possibilities of emancipation with the black as object. Anti-black is the residue that remains, the intransigent substance that makes it impossible to destroy metaphysics completely. The black nihilists must confront this residue with the understanding that the eradication of the residue will truly end the world itself. Black emancipation is more destructive. It is not an aperture and opening for future possibilities of political reconfiguration, because anti-blackness infuses itself into every fabric of social resistance. It is impossible to emancipate blacks without literally destroying the world. Moreover, this means that black emancipation will not yield a new world or possibility of reorganization. Black emancipation is the nihilistic solution that will destroy the field of all possible solutions. In this sense, black emancipation becomes something like death for the world that with all its Heideggerian balances. So this establishes mutual exclusivity. They want to reconfigure and wallow in the possible becoming of the world. We demand the end of the world. There is no possibility. There is no becoming without affirming the end of the world in itself for the black object, which is the reason that we will also win our link argument here, that the ways in which progress is able to occur is through black suffering. That's our warrant evidence from the first. That's our second piece of warrant evidence that indicates the ways in which they have indicated particular types of progress or becoming is by having a black as object for a referential point in terms of understanding freedom in and of itself. So, for instance, to go from slavery to Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex, you can only understand freedom by moving the black to another position of imprisonment, to another position of enslavement, which is the reason that we have answered all of your assemblages arguments, because there's no way to assemble an identity from nothingness. This is the reason that the warrant evidence is going to be supercharging, or this is going to be supercharging linked to the criticism, because your beliefs in potentiality is exactly what replicates results. Also, I would want to say that we also established that mutual exclusivity by saying that you don't want to express resentment for the world, but for us we want to express resentment for the world itself, because there's no other object for our resent. There only is ourselves or the world itself, but we will never internalize the anti-black bias that tells us that we are the pathogen, that we are the issue. All of your arguments about progress, betterment, progress and betterment, etc., would necessarily imply that it was fucking Trayvon Martin's fault for being shot, that it is Renisha McBride's fault for being shot, because we have gotten somewhere from slave times, because those contingent violences have changed, but we refuse that. That is the reason that the judge must engage in an act of political policy to renounce the world inherently as unethical and immoral, something that cannot become, but rather must be the demand of the world, the end of the world itself. Look, we're dying of thirst. You need to sing about us. We need to recognize the stories. We need to recognize the people that have been lost in history. In a world where you have not performed political apostasy, you have not performed the idea of resisting ressentiment in and of itself, you leave us to keep dying of thirst. I'm listening to your dry-ass 2AC and I'm questioning what the hell about it offers anything of becoming for me. Our argument isn't that we reject becoming in and of itself, but we reject becoming in the modern world order. Becoming for blackness right now in the status quo means Trayvon Martin getting shot, Renisha McBride getting shot. This is the reason that we cannot be contingent upon this debate space, the judges, anything like that in order to affirm ourselves. Rather, we must engage in the act of political apostasy in order to recognize the inherent unethicality of the world itself. You say we need to have new ethical ties to the world. We say, fuck the world in and of itself. It is inherently unethical, but that in that of itself is the only ethical response, I guess you could say, to the world itself. That's what our warrant evidence indicates. And you can see. I was going to read this warrant card that answered the permutation, but I think I've answered that in terms of mutual exclusivity. But I will say that warrant also indicates that when you try to force that spiritual into the political, that's when ontological death becomes necessarily permanent.
Okay, I guess I want to start with this
piece of art, no evidence that you
Sure.
read. How is it that we believe in the potentiality of the U.S. when we are an explicit
You say we can
criticism
break
of
down the
military?
fear that militarizes bodies. I say, fuck that. That's not true. The United States will always militarize itself against blackness because of that object of fear, because of that object of paranoia. Them voting after doesn't do shit about that. And
So
that, I
does
guess that
voting-
becomes another
I mean,
reason to
what
vote
does
negative.
voting negative do about that?
Voting negative recognizes that truth. That is the act of political apostasy, the act of recognizing
Also-
the inherent
also,
unethical
Why does
behavior.
voting, why does
Also,
voting
one
AF though
part-
mean that we believe in the potential speed of the
Because you
US?
say that. You say vote after because you break down linear time. I
says
don't
we
think that's
believe in
true.
the potential of the U.S.
Excuse me?
No part of the we are a criticism of U.S. occupation abroad.
Then what's the reason to vote after? That's the question. We say there's no reason to
Because
vote
it's-
after, so you should vote negative. There's no reason
because
to
that's
engage in
bad.
the shit that you do.
All right.
There's no reason to affirm. There's no
Sure.
reason to engage, to act anything.
That's fine. Second piece of Warren evidence that you read said that black emancipation is world destructive, but it is not a possibility. What is that distinction between possibility and emancipation?
We would say, well, there's no distinction with both. In terms of, in the specificity of blackness, right, we demand the end of freedom, of the world, of security, of all these different things, of the idea
Why
of
is that not
becoming, right,
why is
of
that different
humanity
than
itself.
potentiality?
Excuse me?
Why is that different than potentiality?
Because we don't see anything beyond that destruction. We don't cling to anything in the future. We don't say, look, once we end the world, we'll all be free and happy, because we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what the end of the world looks like. That's why we don't fiend for it. That's why we don't act to end the world. We act to renounce the world in and of itself, right? Like, we recognize the world needs to
I guess-
end for black emancipation. That doesn't mean that we work towards that. We're tired of working. We're not slave. Like, we refuse to be enslaved
Sure.
to militarism
I guess
anymore.
that leads me into my next question, which is that you say you don't reject becoming in general, but just becoming in the current world order. What part of the 1AC upholds that current world order?
We would say that all, like you literally said in cross-ex, there must have been progress, right? Like, we don't believe that, there's nothing possible for black folk in the current world order. We say that's not true.
So
Like,
the
you
only
literally say that in
the only
cross-ex,
part of the 1AC
right? You're
is that
saying that
sometimes progress can be made. That's the only link.
Exactly. Is that
That's not the
narrative
only
of
link.
Sometimes that allows black people to chase
That-
the fabulous object that is the political. That's
also
our
the
argument.
cruel optimism that we can end that logic of fear that drives the United States militarism. That's
So,
another link.
How does the if the alternative is just like a complete refusal, what does that do then?
You'll
That's
find
the point. It doesn't do anything. We refuse to do shit
Why is
anymore.
that good?
That is pathology. Like, why is that good? Why is anything good?
Yeah.
Why should we be good?
But
It's
how
not
do
that
you
it-
said
it's not
violence
that-
happens?
listen,
How do you
listen,
solve
this is
that?
important. This is important. It's not that it does nothing in the abstract, but rather it is a spiritual response that does something spiritually for black people. It might not do anything materially, right? Like material implications for civil society, but intrinsic, internal spiritual life, I would make arguments like it does something for black bodies.
That makes sense.
In the light of Miriam Carey, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Bernice McBride, I'm tired of doing shit.
It's just the case. Getting sent out. Let me know when you got it.
Oh, you good, Dan? Yep. We're good.
Alright. Yeah, I don't need this.
You want music?
No, it's okay. Judges ready? It's just a case.
Just case.
Yeah.
The affirmative has no solvency. The entire affirmative says preemption is bad again, but bad against subaltern bodies. But yeah, you bring you again affirmative against minoritarian bodies. You should be rejected because you literally deploy the same discourse that you say is bad, but you deploy it against bodies that don't look like you. This is the offensive argument for why they should be rejected, because they maintain the same resentable impacts that they talk about, which turns the 1AC. Your first argument here is that subjects get developed. Ace point not true. We indicate that bodies, some bodies always have objecthood status, i.e. black bodies are always considered objects, always interpreted as such by civil society because they cannot protect themselves against the white gaze. This is destructive because you should be rejected because your politics with one is one that would seek to miseducate us, which would be one to seek to tell us that we can navigate the white gaze via just saying that we have accomplishments. You should lose because of this. You say life has meaning, but no, it doesn't have meaning. But the 1AC functions as us chasing that nebulous political object crossfly. The cruel optimism argument here, the eternal impact is the menticide and suicide of black communities. This is right. 84 existentialism, accepted to live as a suffering, ultimate test, suffering dictates the way to live. And that what is termed like suicide, deliberate blackish murder committed by white supposed behavioral science affected the situation, control matter, influenced by engaged self-destructive behavior, confirmative, promoting conditions, self-destruction, acts of genocide for black suicide method, promoting genocide by the right reasons, black suicide, political dynamic for political reasons, blacks are being programmed for self-destruction, suicide, one of the judgments inside, defined by deliberate systematic destruction of the group's minds, which is the menticide manifest behavior of blacks in the United States, which is functionally the 1AC menticide destruction of the black mind. When they tell us that we incorporate black people, when we create a space for minoritarian politics, that is the active destruction of black minds, the menticide we talk about, which means we control uniqueness. Now, you make an argument to the preemption argument here. Our argument here, as for the bishop evidence, is that we become the terrorists that you talk about here. We become the normalized bodies that must be preempted against, which turns the 1AC, because the logic of the 1AC is that preemption is bad, but you would turn Rutgers into the terrorists that we must bring a new act against, which turns the logic of the 1AC. Now, first I'll extend the embodiment argument. Here is the embodiment. This side, we indicate that performances must be embodied. We indicate the politics of the 1AC is inaccessible to certain people who look like me. For example, I cannot divorce myself from my materiality. For example, I cannot divorce myself from my blackness. I'm always interpolated as such, whereas for the white gaze. So your performance should be something that could be embodied for a black body. Specifically, we have a reason why this is good. As per Scenario Brinkley 8, this is organic intellectualism. This is Scenario Brinkley 8, the process of signifying designed to challenge the relationship between social power and knowledge, that those with social power are able to determine legitimate knowledge production. These practices usually maintain dominance over non-normative making practices, excluding alternative knowledge making practices. You can validate your claim to the third person experience. Organic intellectuals and academic intellectuals without the process that the weakens our single perspective really like institutional academic power. Knowledge surrounds the industry, so express like students every day for wars and maintain such exclusion, prevent radical solutions to racism, homophobia, classism, sexism, more anxiously the perspective make on our claims market claims which non-uniques all of your offense, because you mean that you cannot take into account any of their offensive arguments because they only use academic intellectuals. We indicate that their politics must come from not only academic intellectuals but organic intellectuals and personal experience in a world where they have no personal experience nor organic intellectuals, means that they cannot embody their performance, and there's no good that can come from their performance because their performance only lead to a miseducation of black people, which was above your arguments about the Murillo about why you also challenge the notion of linear time. That's not offense for you, but rather is an argument for why the alternative of the performance of the 1AC is good enough to solve for the resentment argument or the resentment impacts, because time does not function the same way for white people, the same way it functions for black people. The ways in which black bodies are always targeted when they go into shops, always targeted when they walk the streets, is not the same ways in which white bodies who are revolutionaries who are always targeted, which is a reason for why the performance of embracing Miriam Carey's narrative, the poetry, is a context of spiritual hope is good for black people because it is a version of political apostasy, one that maintains black life and one that resolves the suicide impacts we talk about here. And next you say the embodiment this should be based on affect, but no, when a link that your affect is used to sustain the change for political, the change for cool optimism. As for all of our trick of time arguments, that is an impact turn to your affect argument. No, affect is what sustains racial comfort for white bodies. This is D'Angelo 8. Whites are taught to see interests and perspectives of universal, taught to the individuals see themselves as individuals rather than racially socialized individuals in race history, and hides the way in which wealth has been distributed and accumulated over generations to benefit whites today, while also distance themselves from actions of racial grouping and made a grand for benefit that is why racial comfort arises typically responds something is wrong, blame the person why instances of racial comfort guarantees whites will never face accepted in superficial ways which non-uniques all their arguments for why affect is good. Their affect is just used as a type of racial comfort that gets them the ballot. Next is the fungibility argument. They made blackness the afterthought. All the reasons to why they now incorporate blackness as per the 1AC become impact turns to the affirmative because they made blackness fungible. They as per the ballot, which impact turns all their affirmative arguments for why they break out of time because that is how they made black bodies more fungible based on that type of accumulation. Also, you say the privilege argument. The privilege argument goes away in which we control uniqueness on the alternative level. Even though we read Nietzschean authors, we maintain spiritual hope in the alternative that resolves the impact.
508 is how much y'all have left?
Yeah.
Did you write down?
I got 655.
Yeah.
So the order will be the advantage, and then the king. Yep.
I was like, I told the advantage. I was like, is that gone now? Is it okay?
Alright. Is everyone good?
The difference between our conceptual resentment and theirs is that they have a circular kind of pessimism that sees the world as a pre-given that they have to always hate in every instance. Our argument is that the world is in a constant state of becoming, and it is only the will to negative, it is the will to nothingness that sees that state of becoming as something that has to be violently reacted against, which means that the total negativity of the alternative is something that we have an impact term to. The impact is that it denies the world of any value and necessarily results in a kind of violent subject formation in which you have to react violently against the world because you can never tame it in the kind of temporality of preemption as are exemplified by contemporary military presence. Their root cause claims to this argument about how anti-blackness structures the temporality of preemption prove a link to an argument that indicates there's an analogous structure between the two, but they have conceded our argument about how the contemporary nature of military presence has adapted. There's no transcendental structure or force that controls the directionality of it, which they say, the disclosure arguments. You can see that we had a bunch of terrible apps before the season. We gave you the app on the flash drive. Preemption would attempt to control what you should do. We only said that this is what we're doing. What you can do is open to you. We agreed this app against Michigan State. We're not asking you to divorce your identity from theorization, but rather high theory always has an effective material component. The ontological position that you choose to adopt is a kind of embodied materiality because there's no distinction between thinking and acting. It's not a universal kind of white intellectual. So because what that looks like for different people will be different, which is also an articulation of the permutation argument. Because we don't tell you you can't have spiritual hope if your argument is that it's necessary for you all to have that kind of strategy. Then there's nothing about the alternative, but nothing about the app that would preclude this. Now there's no bright line between the organic and professional intellectual. All of our arguments about how high theory is embodied would also answer this argument. The one in our argument on the Murillo evidence proves that they reproduce the same kind of hope that we do, because they say that we can solve the resentment against the future, which means if they have a link to the app, they have a link to the self. There's no their theory of time is not inconsistent with the affirmative view. We break down that kind of Western telos that says that there's a coherence to time that moves into a particular direction. Instead, we affirm it's a kind of chaos. Now, the criticism with all the link arguments presuppose they have one terminal solvency deficit to the app, which means we'll take them up on the question of the fundamental ontology claims that the structure anti-blackness. If we win, that there is not an inevitability to anti-blackness, then all their arguments about how there can never be progress don't make any sense. First argument is under determination. There's a disconnect between the examples they give in cross-examination and the claim that we'll always be experiencing the same thing. This isn't a precise example of a kind of inductive confirmation bias where you only see the things you're looking for. Second is the Saldana and Rosella's evidence goes completely conceded. It's a mutually contradictory and mutually exclusive theory of how anti-blackness operates, which means that they have no game in this debate. Anti-blackness is a result of the contingent settling of viscous patterns. People settle in certain ways in certain places in order to form communities and then define other communities through degrees of difference. But they've mistaken the surface of what appears to be anti-blackness for its depth, as if there is always a yes-no question between whiteness and blackness. But this ignores the way that negativity does not exist, but rather that negativity is a product of differentiations between becomings. This is exemplified by the Saldana evidence discussion of model minorities, as well as folks who have white passing privilege, is a way that the concept of whiteness is internally differentiated, which means that they have to presuppose a unity of whiteness in order to affirm blackness as something that is a negation against that concept. The prior settlement of structures, the prior settlement of structures depends upon the prior movement of becoming, which they have no argument as to how that operation operates. All their impact terms to becoming don't make any sense, because racism is a kind of will to nothingness that sees that attempts to staticize those structures, which means if we win any of our internal links to the way that they have attempted themselves to mistake the illusion of the settlement of structures of anti-blackness for its nature, which then means we have internal link turn the The advantage. Now, the permutation utilizes the alternative rejection of political hope to indicate that we will no longer have that kind of cruel optimism, but rather that we can we don't have to invest in political structures. The affirmative allows the affirmative is an allowance for you to be beautiful without needing for you to be anything in particular, but rather that whatever you are is good enough. Becoming is a descriptive claim, which means any of your impact turns are inevitable. It's only a question of how we orient ourselves towards inevitable becoming. Not all progress is created equal. The Warren and Martineau evidence is about political, legal inclusion. They don't have a piece of contextual evidence. It's actually about the affirmative. The ass disruption of the idea that some kind of static human subject, or there's a telos to liberalism that would give the world coherence, is something that means that we're not the kind of political hope that they're talking about. The Warren evidence and the one in R about how being is the problem. The card that's like metaphysics is anti-blackness is a link term because we reject being. Now, you can see the Masumi evidence indicated presupposes that they have presupposed the ontological objecthood of black positionality, which reifies the metaphysics of identity because it indicates that we can isolate individuals into coherent structures, and black politics exists in the denial of white politics. This kind of binary logic is the operative logic of racism because it's staticized, and because racism has to staticize black folk, which means that the desire to come up with coherent identities is the problem. We disrupt that.
We got
Wait.
starting now.
arms? I hate to be like the fat dude with the khakis and the undershirt. But it's hot over here. No, honestly, I wasn't even looking.
Was it a critique case?
No, you're gonna have to wait for these.
I'm sorry.
Hold up.
Okay, never mind. I'm good. Critique,
Is it all good?
We are winning this debate because we are controlling the uniqueness level, the uniqueness question within this debate. They have said that we have not proven that anti-black violence is not inevitable. Well, what example, what counterexample have they provided to say that we have some kind of possibility of freedom of redress, etc.? We have pointed out the fact that Bernice McBride, Trayvon Martin, and Emmett Till, nothing has changed from slavery to Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex. This is the reason that the 1AC already is disadvantageous because it's a form of co-optimism in a world where you said that we have denied the inherent value of the world. That is because there is no inherent value to the world. There is no value to becoming because becoming has come at the expense of black bodies. This is the reason. This is exactly what the Warren analysis indicates when he says that we always affirm suffering as a form of progress. He's literally quoting MLK here to say that these ways in which the civil rights movement propagates suffering as the only answer to anti-black violence is exactly what traps us into that form of resentment where we always lead to menticide of that resentment for the self rather than actualizing and projecting that resentment towards the world itself or producing those particular instances of anti-black violence. This is the reason the 1AC is simply an act of trying to translate anti-black dehumanization into a larger humanist project to understand freedom and becoming. But the problem is that you do not speak to actual black children who have to go through the daily battles and daily violences of anti-black violence. What are you going to tell my students like Sekou when he asks me, why do I have to keep listening to my debate coach? Why do I have to keep acting these ways in order to be a debater? You constantly tell us what it means to be beautiful, what it means to be in the state of becoming, to move, etc. But what about the inaction that we feel within ourselves all the time, the hatred, the anger, the frustration with the world itself? That is the reason the poetry or the performance of discussing our frustration with anti-black violence is specifically in the context of Miriam Carey is our rejection of the politics of hope. We refuse to drive to the White House anymore. We refuse to engage in any kind of normalizing structure of debate that says that we can move past these grievances. So the reason you vote negative is because there is no possibility of becoming. Anti-blackness structures the world itself. That is our Warren analysis. The ways in which rational, irrational, the unthought, and the thought are always divided through an anti-black violence. That constantly relegates blackness to a position of the unthought. But the question becomes, why do we seek value within that, or why do we seek value within the anti-black world in and of itself rather than seeking value outside of it? That's the reason the act of political apostasy is still one that can co-opt all of the benefits of the affirmative, but speaking in the context of particular black people. This is the reason that our third piece of Warren analysis in the 2NC will answer their evidence specifically in their context, because it indicates that we cannot weaken metaphysical being with the understanding that blackness is a demand for the end of the world itself rather than a becoming of a new world. So let me give you an example. Rather than believing that we can move past the deaths of Trayvon Martin and Bernice McBride, we recognize that our lives act as a parasite upon the world itself. Rather than trying to be good or be normal citizens or be good black folk, we refuse those tropes, we refuse those pathologizations that you have placed upon our bodies. Just like you say that you turn the negative because we create violent, unethical people. That is pathologization. Why is our violence something that is always unethical? This is why the inherent unethicality of the world is something that must be renounced. It is something that only protects your racial comfort, as the D'Angelo evidence says on case, because you always seek for some kind of redress, some kind of understanding, some kind of controlling of people in and of themselves. This is the reason you double turn yourself when it comes to the question of preemption, because that pathologization process is something that is only done in order to maintain the coherency of civil society in and of itself. So
1AC causes black suffering because of the resentment that it describes upon particular people. Your conceptions of beauty and becoming is something that never happens. I've extended the D'Angelo evidence to say that this is something that protects white comfort in a world where we cannot become, in a world where our bodies are limited by the racist horizons and also all of this stuff that you extend on the critique is not offense for you. We can concede that the ways in which anti-blackness operates, that people have different proximities to blackness and whiteness, when we'll still win, that anybody who's proximately close to blackness is always pathologized, always inscribed as a particular...
Especially when they concede all the back burner arguments. They put black people
right,
on the back
especially
burner
when they concede,
tokenize black people. Yeah.
Especially when they concede the black back burner arguments that are contextualized by the Martineau evidence. There is no faith, there is no belief, there is no possibility of the United States decreasing that kind of fear, that kind of preemption that it has in relation to blackness because of the object of paranoia it has in relation to blackness itself, which means that either the 1AC is the 1AC is a core optimism, a false belief in the potentiality of ending that fear, of ending that relation to time itself.
Also, they can see the fungibility arguments, how we turn the app because they use blackness as a fungible token for the ballot.
Right, they concede all of our debate arguments because why must the judges affirm our value? Why do I have to be a good debater to be valuable? I think that this also answers the question of their argument of, we had shitty apps. What's wrong with having a shitty app? I've been told multiple times that my app is shitty. Does that mean that I'm less of a person? That's the problem with the 1AC, is that you constantly ascribe particular normalizations and particular conceptions of goodness and beauty, etc. That is something that is not relatable to all people. The performance of the 1AC is one that you vote for because it is something that is pathologized, something that is not recognizable to civil society, but it's something that is still meaningful to particular people. That is the bright line between organic intellectuals and academic intellectuals. We don't try to translate our fucking performances. We don't try to translate that shit to be meaningful for you because it's meant to be meaningful for us. It's meant to produce some kind of antagonism towards civil society inherently that we can break it down, or that we can break that shit down. So we don't try to be normal. We don't try to be good. We try to antagonize civil society.
99.9% sure the 2NR conceded the permutation do both, which means that it is completely game over for them. Was conceded, and this is the goddamn NDT. You should not just spot them a mutually exclusivity argument, which means that the permutation is able to resolve the link in the other. That means it's able to resolve the link in the impact. Obviously, it means it's able to resolve the link in the impact. Their only articulation of what political apostasy is in the entirety of the round is that it is a form of spiritual negation towards the world. If we win a shred of a risk of defense on the no link argument, it's a reason why you could still have that form of discontent with the current world and still affirm potentialities that are beyond the current configuration of the world. That is what the permutation is, and I don't think there was enough of a link extended in the 2NR that you should just say that the kind of potentiality that we are affirming is always one that is embedded within civil society, which means that I think that this is actually going to be a fairly easy ballot. I know this round's been kind of messy, but here is the ballot I think you can write. The permutation was conceded, which means that there is a very low risk of a link. There is also a fairly good risk of a link turning a conceded DA to the alternative via the form of the Musimi evidence. The fundamental thesis of the AF never said the world was redeemable or believed in the potentiality of the United States. We are a criticism of the affect of preemption, which causes subjects to become complicit with the larger network of militarism that causes war against all non-normative life. They have conceded the Musimian 7 and Musimian 15 evidence that says that there is a larger network in which oppression operates, and only a disruption of that network is capable of ever causing any kind of capable of any kind of change in the sense of a breakdown of the sorts of structures that cause violence. We say that where the military sees a threat, you should sign an AF ballot in order to affirm a potentiality of art. Now, I'll go ahead and do the link debate here. What the hell is it? I don't know what it is in the 2NR. They just presuppose that we believe in the redeemability of the civil society in the world, but that was never our argument. We have consistently explained this with a degree of nuance they have never reconciled with. We are not simply an argument that legal personhood is good, which is while all of their warrant evidence are saying that we should have some kind of political hope that eventually black people will be fully come into the fold of civil society. That's not what we're saying, but that is what their links are saying. We are simply saying that potentiality is good. The link is so thin, and the explanation of the difference between something like emancipation and potentiality is so small that any risk of a link is more than likely resolved by the permutation. Our argument is not that legal personhood is good. They give several examples in the 2NR about how there's no value to becoming within the current world. The AF tells us how they should be beautiful, and that that we should not be a good citizen. That is the kind of becoming that we are affirming. We are not saying that we should only become within the current confines of what civil society is, but rather that those things currently excluded within the society and the network established by military presence, as described via the Musimian 15 and Musimi 7 evidence, is that those kind of potentials that are excluded should be affirmed, which means that we are never an affirmation of becoming within civil society, but always an affirmation of becoming outside of it, and the potentiality of the beauty of things that are currently oppressed and violence is done against, which means that we are, in that sense, a destruction of the kinds of liberal subjectivity and the sort of world that they are also criticizing, which means the 1AC is a parallel criticism to the 1NC, and it's another thing that is resolved by the permutation. Now, I think there's also a link term that we are a criticism of the world. This was extended a little bit above. Musimian 15 and Musimian 7 says that the logic of preemption is bad because it upholds a network of certain kinds of violence and oppression. This was exactly what it is that they're talking about, because when this will be done a little bit further down the flow, but when they've conceded that the larger way about the fact that things like anti-black violence works in a network, the fact that we are a criticism of that network and an attempt to try to change the way that people relate to affect in that network, even if there's not a possibility that we change everyone's mind, the very fact that you can sign a ballot and open yourself to that potentiality is the most you can ever possibly do when there are simply 8 people discussing this in the NDT, which means that we are a criticism of the world and the kinds of subjectivity. The McCormick evidence is very explicit at criticizing how an openness to the speeds of subjectivity and the ways that potentiality can move outside of the simple confines of civil society will always destabilize what it means to be human, which allows for new modes of life and new forms of relationships to emerge, which can be fundamentally beautiful. Now, I'll do the DA to the alternative. This is the Musimian 2 evidence. I know it wasn't extended very well in the 1AR, but it was entirely conceded, which means I think you should give us some leeway on this question. The argument is that simply that your alternative always functions in the realm of assuming that there is something coherent, there is some coherent thing called blackness, and that black identity can be separated from the rest of the political sphere. That is problematic because that means that when you just simply affirm the impossibility of blackness ever doing anything, you always just stay at one point on the grid, but the grid itself always remains intact, which means that violence can keep being done. Simply affirming identity in response to a network that wants you to have an identity is just a means of making certain bodies visible for violence to be able to be done against them. Our argument is that the problem with affirming the potentiality and those potentials that exist outside civil society and via the 1AC allows for a complete scrambling of that grid and destruction of the identity that allows oppression to happen. Now, there is no substantive answer to Saldana and Rosales' evidence in the 2NR. Both indicts the descriptive truth of their theory and anti-blackness and provides independent offense. First is, prior to the settlement of structures, there are only flows in becoming. Whatever they say, this is how the world will always be. They have mistaken the top-level appearance of a structure for its depth. Underneath the technologies of anti-blackness are forces that could be redirected away from the will to nothingness. This means there is nothing inevitable about any structure. This is the ass countermove to the temporality of military preemption. This is our argument about how we need to not give up political tools, because sometimes we can engage the state to try to restrain it from doing violence, while also saying that no, we should not try to simply advocate for things like political personhood, which is the only real shred of a link I think they have. Second, their understanding of anti-blackness is dialectic. Two, in our argument that so-called model minorities are more proximate to blackness proves our argument blackness versus whiteness. This presupposes that whiteness is an internally coherent category. Instead of operating by exclusion and negation, racism operates through incorporation and capture.